Oliveira versus Max Holloway Part 2 is going to be different, and here's why. Look, I was the leader of the charge. What's the big deal with Charles? Why do you guys love Charles so much? I don't know if I have been told off by you guys more than on that subject, and I never gave in to you. I don't give in to the mob. But Charles did win me over. And one thing that I noticed, and one of the things that I was critical about Charles on is I fought on the same card. The night that Charles fought Jim Miller, I was on that card against Shogun. So, I believe that's who I fought that night. Now, Charles was billed as the jiu-jitsu ace. I mean, this is the next Hoist Gracie. Everything that Damian Maia was, Charles was. And we were told this, and maybe even more. I mean, this was the king of submissions, and this was just kind of the chatter, the behind the scenes, and this is what people really believed, and it spilled over to the media. It was very exciting, and not only did Charles lose that night, he lost by submission. And not only did he lose by submission, he lost by a pretty basic submission known as a knee bar. And Charles was young. He was 24 years old. Jim Miller turns out gonna be a Hall of Famer. Like, you didn't really know what you were looking at, but I'm just sharing for you, when a jiu-jitsu ace goes out there and loses at his own game, it stuck with me for a while. It just did. It was one of the things that slowed me down on the Charles train. Now, there was also other things that happened to Charles along the way. There was other losses, and at one point, he had like 8 wins, but 4 losses. It was something along these lines where you guys are going, no, man, this is the next big thing, and I was very resistant in pushing back. Now, to be clear with you, Max Holloway is a favorite. Minus 230. Oliveira is a plus 175. Those are according to my partners over at DraftKings. And by the way, that's about a 2-to-1 favorite to Max. That's reasonable and makes sense considering it's a championship fight, and Max is the champion. That's reasonable and makes sense considering it's the same guys doing the same thing, and Max won the first time. But hold on. And I'm not giving you a prediction right now. I'm just telling you this is going to be a very different fight. When I talked about, and what made me late to the Charles bandwagon, of which I'm on. Now, I've always been on the Max bandwagon, but I got on the Charles bandwagon. And one thing about it is Charles was just inconsistent. When I talk about him being 8-4, you want to tell me all these guys that he submitted, and I want to counter that by telling you what he got submitted as well. That was all at 145 pounds. Charles was not a 145-pounder. Charles is a big guy. He's a tall guy, and he's a long guy, and he was a young guy. And one thing, when you're tall, and you're long, and you're young, as time goes by, you only get bigger. So Charles finally moved up to 155. Now, that's when he goes on his run, and that's when he goes on to be world championship. But when you're a guy like me, that's sitting back and just kind of analyzing the numbers, what happened? There is an explanation. There's an explanation of 145 pounds. That's what happened. Charles got beat by the scale before. Charles got beat by the scale, as a matter of fact, right off the top of my head, two times. He just wasn't a 145-pounder. He was putting his focus in to making weight. He wasn't putting his focus into the match. And the first one to tell you that is Charles. Charles has been wanting to fight Max again. He actually used to bang that drum of fighting Max again, and then he stopped because he left the weight class and there was no opportunity to fight Max. Max moves up, and all of a sudden Charles starts this again. Charles has been telling anybody willing to listen, I can beat that guy. I should have beat that guy. Go back to that night with what I know now, and I would beat that guy. This is a different fight. It's a different fight because that first contest, while won by Max, was 15-minute affair. This is a 25-minute affair. The first contest, you've got a little prestige and some money on the line. This one, you got a lot of prestige, you got a lot of money, but you have a title. And it's just different. Everything is different. Does that favor Charles? I'm not willing to go that far. I'm not actually here to tell you that. Does that favor Max? I would if I got to fight Max, I would much rather fight Max for 15 minutes than I would for 25, but Charles and his team don't agree. They believe that Charles is the championship fighter. They believe that Charles is the one that's going to come on in rounds 4 and 5. That's interesting. And not only is that interesting, if they turn out to be right, that will change the outcome of this fight. Like, whoever's going to win rounds 4 and 5, whoever can win the championship rounds, whoever can push harder, whoever's got the pacing is the guy that's going to win this fight. I'm not convinced to tell you that Charles has better hands than Max, but I'm also not going to concede that Charles has better ground game than Max. It is going to be a competition where you're going to have that warrior spirit. You are going to be forced to dig deep. Anybody that has ever got the jump on Max Holloway has had to dig deep because he's not going anywhere, no matter what. No matter round 1, round 2, round 5, you want to make it 8, 9, 10 rounds. Max isn't going anywhere. But you're going to have a different fight. And there is two Charles. That's true. You can go back and just look at the records. The inconsistency or the up or down or hit or miss that you had from Charles, that's true at 145 pounds, not at 155. He's a different guy. And there's something known as a mask in combat. And a guy will have a mask, and you're kind of talking about his allure. You're kind of talking about the aura. It's not any different than the playground where all your buddies tell you, don't mess with that dude. And that gets in your head. You're like, hey, that's a good, don't mess with that guy. Once you compete with somebody, the mask is off. Whoever that person actually is behind the allure, you now know. And that is one thing I felt watching Charles. Charles was one of these guys that was resistant to his own greatness. Everybody talked about how great Charles was. But instead of encouraging Charles for a young Charles, that put pressure on him. And people are afraid to accept greatness. There's a lot that comes with that. People are afraid to win, believe it or not, because there's a lot that comes with that. And that was a young Charles. An older, more mature Charles has accepted how good he is. And he would like to right some wrongs. And he's been given a very rare opportunity where he's going to get what he asked for. He asked for Max. He asked for a redo. He told everybody, I can beat that guy regardless of what your lying eyes told you. I think that he's got a very good chance. But aside from outcome, I'm telling you, this is a different fight. And it's a different fight because Charles never was a 145-pounder. He was a lightweight. And this is a lightweight contest.